Mark McCann Barrett, 33, married Amy Dragic, his 19-year-long partner, in March 2019. The couple and their 3 young children, ages 5 to 8, lived in London, UK. Mark and his family have been through a lot in the years since his half-sister, Jacqueline Barrett, was murdered a few years ago. After a difficult few years, Jacqueline's life began to improve when she met house Sam Jima in the summer of 2010. The relationship flourished at first, and the couple appeared blissfully happy. On a typical September evening, Mark and his wife, Amy Dragic, were at home with their children. Amy picked up Mark's phone around midnight and began scrolling through the pictures. She saw a video that she didn't like. In that video, a young woman was seen masturbating in front of the camera while holding a sex toy. Georgina Duncombe, the woman in the video, was the ex-girlfriend of one of Mark's close friends, Lewis Kelly, 40. Amy was outraged and demanded to know why her partner had the video on his phone. Mark called his friend Lewis and asked him to inform Amy that he had sent it to her as a joke or by accident while drunk. Nonetheless, Lewis was deeply disturbed by this news. Georgina had sent him this personal video 6 months prior, when they were still dating. She'd also recently sent it to Mark via WhatsApp. It was unclear why she would send this video to Mark. They were almost certainly romantically involved. Amy and Lewis were both shocked by the news. He was certain he hadn't shown the video to Mark. He assumed Georgina was the one who had sent it. Mark had no idea that Lewis still cared deeply for Georgina and that their unexpected breakup had broken Lewis's heart. Lewis had a feeling Georgina was seeing someone else, and this information reinforced his belief that Mark was to blame for the breakup. Nonetheless, there was a way for him to find out for certain. Lewis left his house in Tottenham, North London, and went to his ex-house partner's in West London to get her phone and see if she had forwarded the video to Mark. He broke into her house, stole her phone, and drove away. He was able to confirm his suspicions about his friend Mark and Georgina thanks to access to her phone. He deduced that Mark and Georgina were having sexual relations based on the calls he made and received, as well as their conversation. Lewis was devastated and enraged. Meanwhile, Mark and Amy were having a major disagreement about the video. Mark took a cab to Lewis's place in the early hours of the morning after a night of drinking and popping diazepam. Because Mark needed time to decide what to do next, Lewis let him spend the night at his house and sleep on the sofa. A neighbor of Lewis's heard yelling and what appeared to be screaming for help coming from Lewis's house early the next morning. By 9:30 a.m., Lewis's neighbors heard commotion coming from the stairwell and saw Mark, bloodied and terrified, staggering down the stairs. When they saw how badly he was hurt, they called an ambulance to take him to an East London hospital. Lewis had vanished, and he had apparently taken the gun with him. When the cops arrived, they quickly pieced together what had happened that morning. Lewis Kelly shared an apartment with Thomas Saunders. At 7:34 a.m., 16 minutes after Thomas had left the apartment to go to work, his neighbors noticed Lewis briefly walking down the street, apparently to retrieve something from his car before returning to the flat. Mark was still in good health when he spoke briefly on the phone with Amy at 8:43 a.m. Nonetheless, Lewis Kelly left the apartment and drove out of town at 9:08 a.m., only 25 minutes after the phone call ended. He'd already shot Mark several times by that point. He shot 5 rounds from a Glock 9mm pistol into his leg and foot, causing significant bleeding. The bullets that had passed through both of his legs were discovered by cops under the couch where he had been sleeping. As the search for Lewis Kelly began, police held press conferences and made announcements in the media and on social media. They searched everywhere for him and warned people not to approach him because he was armed and dangerous, but he was never found. On September 27th, 10 days after the incident, Lewis was pulled over in a car driven by another man. Lewis's friend, it turned out, had been encouraging him to turn himself in. Mark was still in critical condition at the hospital, fighting for his life. As a result, on September 29th, Lewis was arrested on suspicion of attempted murder and taken to a police station in North London. However, tragic news arrived the next day when it was revealed that Mark had died as a result of his injuries. Unfortunately, Mark McCann Barrett died at the age of 33. Amy, his wife, and their 4 young children were left behind. The victim died from multiple gunshot wounds to the lower extremities, as well as massive internal bleeding and a lack of oxygen to the brain, according to the autopsy. According to a close family friend, there was a lot to process. He also lost his sister to murder, she added. So much has already been endured, and now everyone involved must endure it once more. His final moments were spent with his mother. She stayed by his side the entire time he was in the hospital. Mark was the type of person who was always looking for ways to help those in need. Simply put, he saw only the best in people. He was always willing to assist others. His children were his greatest joy and pride in life. As a result, their entire world has been turned upside down. You're sitting there, assuming it'll never affect my family. We were fine until it happened, and now it's happened again, and it's beyond comprehension. When questioned by police, Lewis Kelly denied murder. He claimed that Mark lunged at him with a knife and that he only fired 5 or 6 shots because he was so startled. He claimed that Mark had arrived at his house looking disoriented and out of place, and that he had been hiding his face behind a hood. Lewis expressed his concern for him. He claimed he let his friend in, but when he turned around after closing the door, Mark was holding a knife and a gun. As Mark lunged at him with the knife, Lewis grabbed the gun and fired at Mark's lower torso to avoid serious injury. Lewis Kelly pleaded guilty to manslaughter when tried for murder at the Old Bailey. At trial, Lewis claimed that he shot Mark McCann Barrett in self-defense. Nonetheless, the prosecution used a pathologist, a weapons expert, and blood state analysis to prove that he assaulted his victim while he was sleeping and helpless. They were also able to demonstrate that Lewis had gone to get a gun hours before the attack and had invited Mark to his house for the night as part of his plan. Nonetheless, a jury of 10 found Lewis Kelly guilty of manslaughter rather than murder. He was sentenced to a minimum of 12 years in prison for this crime. Members of Mark's family were devastated to learn that Lewis had been found guilty of manslaughter rather than murder. Mark was a loving partner and father, his whole world revolved around his children, my grandchildren. I'll never forgive the person who did this, Mark's mother said in her victim impact statement. He took away the father of my 4 grandchildren when they were very young. I'll never be able to tell him how much I loved him or how much he meant to me. Detective Chief Inspector Neil John, the investigation's lead detective, expressed concern that such severe violence is commonly regarded as an appropriate response to conflict. Taking the life of another person can never be justified. What are your thoughts on the Mark McCann Barrett's case? I really appreciate your input. Thank you for taking the time to watch. Be a part of the Chris Crime Diaries family and hit the subscribe button now.